Profesor,
Mhm.
las siguientes preguntas estarán basadas en su libro El Arca después de Noé.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yes, I recognize it.
Es un excelente libro realmente. Tengo algunas preguntas acerca de esto.
Okay.
¿En qué tableta es la que nosotros encontramos este diluvio babilónico? ¿Y de cuándo es datada la fecha?
The tablet, which is the subject of this book, was written in about 1750 BC. So nearly 4,000 years ago, about 1750 BC. So the thing is this, that since the 19th century, we have had examples in cuneiform tablets of the story of the flood, like the story in the Bible. But the importance of the tablet which I published is that it is 1,000 years older than the time of the other tablets or of the Bible. It is 1,000 years older. So what we have in this tablet is not the first telling of the story. The story must have been very much older, and for a very long period of time, it was a matter of oral literature, where people recited the story, they told the story, long before it was written down. So the important thing is that it's quite near the time when stories were first written down. So it is an early example of the first kind of telling of the story. Well, now the thing is here that we can tell from many pieces of cuneiform writing that in their culture, in their minds, the flood was a very important thing that everybody knew about and all children knew about, and it was something that happened a very, very long time ago. So we can see it's part of their culture. So we have tablets for more than 2,000 years with the story on. But the important thing is this, that in the country of ancient Iraq, that the rivers flooded sometimes very badly, and their knowledge that water could be destruction was also part of their long cultural understanding. They were always frightened of big floods. So it is possible that this literature comes from a history of many floods. It is also possible that the literature contains a memory of a huge destructive flood which affected the whole of the country. This is also very likely. So it is part of their deep psychology. And sometimes scribes talk about the time before the flood as opposed to the time after the flood. It was a kind of horizon in their minds. It's a bit like old men today who say before the war and after the war. It's a kind of massive thing in the mind which divides time into before and after. So in my opinion, this is part of Mesopotamian psychology. And I think that this sets the position whereby when we encounter the story of the flood in the Hebrew Bible, in the book of Genesis, the description in the Hebrew Bible, when it is very similar indeed to the Babylonian example, we have to assume that the Hebrew text derives from this much older tradition.
Pero, profesor, en el área de Mesopotamia, dada la cantidad de ríos que hay, siempre experimentaba crecidas y inundaciones. Entonces, este diluvio narrado en la tablilla es un diluvio ejemplar, paradigmático, o es uno de los tantos inundaciones que hubo.
Well, my idea, this is in some ways a personal view, but I believe that the way the narrative, the writing in the literature of the Babylonians is composed, the power of it and the consistency of it probably is a memory of a huge and very destructive flood in very early times that nobody forgot about. Is that all right? Are you okay? So geologists and scientists have told us that there is evidence for very, very serious floods at different times, but I'm not a scientist. All I know is that what is written down to me suggests that there was once something so terrible that no one ever forgot it. They always had it in their minds.
¿Cómo piensa usted, según su opinión, que este relato fue andando hasta llegar a la Biblia hebrea? ¿Cómo llegó a la Biblia hebrea este relato ya transformado?
Yes, so the thing here is, it's a very big and important question. My idea is that the transmission from Babylonian into Hebrew can be explained historically. I think the transmission happened in Babylon between human beings in a very straightforward way. The first point is that Nebuchadnezzar II destroyed the city of Jerusalem, and all the people, all the intelligentsia, all the useful people were taken from Jerusalem to Babylonia. So we have to think like this. When the Judeans from Jerusalem went from their small city into Babylon, Babylon was like Manhattan in America. The impact of that city with its ziggurat and the buildings and the riches and the learning and the knowledge must have been amazing to them. That's the first thing. And so when they arrived, some of them were settled in the countryside and the villages were kept together, the people would stay together, and many of them went to the capital, to Babylon. The intelligent ones and the youthful ones went to the capital where the king wanted to make sure that they wouldn't rebel. Nebuchadnezzar wanted to make sure that the leaders of these Judean immigrants would not rebel against Babylonia. And we are told in the book of Daniel at the beginning that the clever and intelligent young Judeans who had nothing wrong with them were instructed in the language and tradition of Babylonia for 6 years. They were taught individually in the center of the palace in how to read and write Babylonian cuneiform, how to understand it. So this teaching them was to prevent them from being rebellious. But what happened was that the intelligentsia from Judea, who spoke Hebrew and Aramaic already, the two sister Semitic languages, found it very easy to learn Babylonian, which is also a Semitic sister language. And if you know Hebrew and Aramaic already, Babylonian is straightforward. And so the clever Judeans, the most intelligent, were indoctrinated with Babylonian ideas, and they were taught to read and write. And Daniel himself and the others became judges. It says in the book of Daniel, they became judges. Well, in that period, all the judging, all the records were all in Babylonian cuneiform. So I believe that this is what happened. Now, when they went to school, these Judeans with Hebrew and Aramaic already, we know about their curriculum. We know what they studied in school. And they discovered that the Babylonians had grammar and dictionaries and literature and mathematics and astronomy and medicine. And they must have thought this was marvelous because they had nothing of this in their heads before. And so they learned. And in the curriculum, you can see that there is a tablet, a school tablet with part of the Gilgamesh story written on it, which was used in school, showing that these boys would have read these texts in the classroom with their teachers. So when the Judean intellectuals were writing an account of their own history, when it came to the beginning of everything, they did not have their own tradition of the beginning of everything. And so I believe that they took the story, the dramatic story of the flood from Babylonia, and they reworked it according to their theology. They changed the story to tell a different lesson. Because in the Babylonian story, theologically, the destruction of the world was to do with noise. They thought human beings were too noisy. But in the Old Testament, in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, God decided to destroy mankind because they were wicked. They were sinful. So the narrative, the good story of the world's going to end and you have to build this and you have to rescue everything, the dramatic story, which was such a good story, was put in the washing machine, and out comes the same thing with a different message. And that is, I think, how it worked. And the most convincing thing of all is that in the vocabulary in Hebrew, where the building of the ark is described, there are several words which are Babylonian loan words, which otherwise do not appear in the Hebrew language. So when the story was borrowed, some of the vocabulary came with it. So this is my idea, and I have to tell you, since your institution is not one of faith or religion, but of the intellect, there's something I want to tell your professor. And this is the thing, that when this book was published, I gave lectures in many, many different places to many different sorts of people. And sometimes to clergymen, Christian clergymen, sometimes to rabbis, sometimes to other people. And on some occasions, a person stood up and said, "You are sinful, you are wicked, you are telling us that the Bible isn't been copied, and all this and all this and all this." And this is how I answered it, because I said to this person, "Have you ever tried to write a detective story?" And the person says, no, why? I said, well, I'll tell you something. If you try to write a detective story that's never been written before, it's impossible. Because there are so many of them that whatever you do, you borrow from here, it's impossible to have something completely new. And with the good stories in the world, this is the same situation. And what we have here in the transmission from the Babylonian long history into the funny business about the text of the Hebrew Bible is exactly that. The story is good, but the message is different. And when I've explained this, even some rabbis or who are cross, they said, this we understand. Okay, we're happy like that. Bravo. You're a lovely translator. Bravo.